again, based on my own experiences, I can completely understand that, some of what you interact with on this kind of a level does not come off as very nice.
Yeah.
Right. But some of who I interact with at Walmart don't come off as very nice either. So
You don't need demons to have evil in the world.
you don't need demons to have some not very nice and very unpleasant interactions. All right, welcome everybody to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat. I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. This is my brother John, longtime fan of the creepy and the paranormal.
Hello, folks.
He has picked out a video for me to check out and react to. I don't know what it is, but we're about to find out together.
The idea of a continuing existence despite the passing of a person's physical form is one that has long fascinated humanity. But what if it were possible to force such an entity into being via the use of nothing more than sheer willpower? In this episode, we will examine a case in which that concept was tested and resulted in some degree of success, an undertaking which became known as the Philip experiment.
All right, Philip, what do you got for us?
The reporter looked on, notepad in hand, as those assembled in the centre of the room continued to speak amongst themselves in hushed tones. Only one other person besides himself and the group was present, a colleague who had been appointed to remain alongside him for the duration of their meeting. The people who were seated around the small table before him all shared something of a loose association, but were fully aligned in their fascination with the afterlife. They had been conversing amongst themselves for several minutes now, recounting the history of a long-dead English nobleman, who appeared to have lived something of a colourful past. The journalist had been midway through recording some of this sordid history when he suddenly paused, detecting a visible flicker of the lights situated above him. Although only momentary, this temporary dimming went on to repeat itself several times. At the point he considered commenting on this phenomenon to his chaperone, the journalist's eyes suddenly widened in surprise. The table which the group was seated around seemed to shunt slightly to one side, before moving back to its original position. This unnatural occurrence would be repeated a further 3 times. The reporter began to scrawl in his notepad with some haste. He then glanced up at the table. To his astonishment, a light and translucent patch of haze seemed to have formed immediately above them, which slowly began to expand. Its smoke-like tendrils ventured forth to probe the surroundings, as if it was somehow alive and searching for something. It then began to glide across the small space towards the journalist and his escort. Somewhat bewildered, he was completely at a loss as to how he was going to present what he had just witnessed in his newspaper column the following day. It was a story of a human soul which had been successfully summoned at a séance centuries after its human existence had ended. However, the man that the soul belonged to had never actually existed. It was nothing more than a manifestation, a thought form, created by the small gathering of people who had summoned it. Every society throughout history has made reference to the existence of spirits and the notion of an afterlife. Stories have been passed down from one generation to the next, relating encounters with unknown spiritual entities or the souls of departed loved ones. Discussions on this subject have identified an apparent trend, wherein people who died under the most tragic circumstances seem unable to move on. Quite often it has been theorized that it is the trauma or unexpected manner in which they died that has led them to remain upon the earth. Perhaps the horror of their departure proved too confusing to fully process, or generated an overwhelming sense of unfulfillment or regret, which then drew them back to the living.
Okay. This is already a lot to go
process
through, right? He's just already gone over a lot. I assume he's going to get further into the story about the seance and how it happened.
Yeah.
That can be a couple of different things going on there. Just because you were thinking of Sir Philip that never existed doesn't mean that everyone in that room isn't open and summoning and something else can show up and come through.
Yeah.
It's not like an RSVP, right?
It's not a Discord call.
Right, exactly. It's
it's more an open signal.
It could have been anybody coming through in the room. It could have been a spirit attached to one of the people there, a departed loved one that was coming through, anything like that. So it's not just because you're going imaginary Sir Philip come to us or whatever. It doesn't mean that everyone in the room is channeling the energy of wanting something to come through and manifest. And it gives opportunity to anything else that's got an energy pathway. So
you broadcast a signal, that signal could reach just about anything.
Well, it's easiest for things that are going to have an energy pathway into that situation. So, a departed loved one of somebody sitting at the table, you know what I mean? Or an ancestor of somebody sitting at the table. Like he mentioned, an entity or a spirit that has connections to the physical place. Those energy pathways is like a port of entry. So it could be an object, it could be a place that they have energy connections to, it could be a person they have energy connections to, right? It would be more unusual to be just some random something, but it does happen if really the energy is open to it. Some people sit down to do a seance and go, anything that wants to talk to me. Do you know what I mean? So you're opening up a broader channel that way, but by and large, as usually something with a connection, an energy connection to the area. I know a lot of people place a lot of emphasis on the notion of departed souls being like tethered to or attached to a certain location.
Yeah.
And it's more like those are the easier ports of entry for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is a place that they're very familiar with. It's sort of like when I'm astral traveling, it's easier for me to travel to some place that I know where I'm going.
Someplace you have a fair amount of familiarity.
Yeah, rather than, having to imagine a place I've never been to before to build, you know what I mean, the pathway to get there. So it's when a departed soul is coming through in the physical world, it's easier in places that they're familiar with. They have to build an energy pathway to get to where they're trying to go.
Gotcha.
So in many cases where people are talking about hauntings, some of that is not necessarily that the spirits are stuck in a house or trapped there.
They just have a connection to the house and can go back there more easily than
yeah. And they sometimes they stop in to check on the location, to check on the people that are there. Again, they have connections to family, like energetic connections to family or loved ones, so they will stop in and check on loved ones or other people they were connected to. You do have instances of like lost sheep who don't know where they are, or don't know how to go anywhere else, that they're really only stuck in a location because they don't know how to navigate the situation or to get out of it. So the one location they're familiar with is the place
where they stick around.
Exactly. And we can talk about more of the reasons why spirits get stuck in transition process, don't quite make it all the way over, if that's a point of interest here. But
yeah,
not everything that comes through is stuck. They can come and visit even when they are transitioned over.
They then appear before startled witnesses, either repeating their actions at the point of their death or issuing warnings about the manner of their passing. Scientific opinion on the phenomenon remains starkly divided, with some asserting that there may be unidentified energies or processes at work, forces which currently are not fully understood by the scientific community, but which somehow ensnare and preserve the souls of the departed. Others believe, however, that the spirits in question instead reside solely and firmly within the minds of those who have allegedly encountered them, somehow generated by the participants in the event, the side effects of varying degrees of protracted guilt or trauma. This somehow converts their own vision into a tangible apparition, which is then witnessed by third parties. During the 1970s, one group of researchers based in Canada attempted to demonstrate that it was the human mind which facilitated the appearance of ghosts.
That's fair.
The basis of this idea lay within the previous work of the group's founder, a British academic named George Owen. Dr. Owen had become fascinated with reports of poltergeist activity from around the world. As a result, he had travelled extensively, interviewing witnesses from across the globe and documenting commonalities between each of the different cases. Owen would eventually form the opinion that high degrees of stress being exerted on the minds of those involved had caused them to manifest seemingly supernatural encounters. After settling in Canada with his wife Iris and meeting various other like-minded individuals, he had gone on to form the Toronto Society of Psychical Research, or TSPR. In 1972, Owen had proposed a bold experiment to the members of this group, in which they would attempt to will a fictional ghost into existence, the spirit of a historical figure who had never physically existed, and whose backstory had been crafted completely by their own hand. They would attempt to manifest this entity using only the power of their minds, inviting it to appear before themselves and other witnesses, with a group of 8 core members, including Owen and his wife, dedicating themselves.
I've said this before on other podcasts on the other channel, talking to people, and part of the problem that science has when it's proposing experiments along these lines is that it's hard to come up with an experiment when part of the problem is some of the base facts you're working with are assumptions. So if you're not really understanding how things are working to begin with, it's hard to come up with an experiment that's going to generate some sort of actual result for you.
Especially like consistent results and
Yeah.
measurable things.
So to some degree, he's not wrong. Yes, like whether or not you believe something is going to influence whether or not you're able to witness it. It doesn't mean that your mind created it. It just is whether or not you're able to accept and witness it and see it. They are operating off of this base assumption that the brain is creating what you're seeing, rather than understanding that your state of mind determines whether or not you're able to experience or interact with it. Do you know what I mean?
To a degree, I think.
So the premise of the experiment was always going to generate weird results because it's not one or the other. It's not spirits aren't real because we're imagining them. It's that you can't actually interact with anything or see anything if you don't believe that it's possible. The ego personality closes off those channels.
To the undertaking, having secured a psychologist named Dr. Joel Witten to act as an independent observer for the experiment, Owen then set about creating his subject. He and his colleagues would craft an intricate backstory for the spirit they intended to create, which they could recount in such great detail as to convince themselves it could only be real. The first factor which Dr. Owen and his colleagues decided upon with regards to the creation of their test subject was the time frame in which it had existed. Examining various historical settings, they were eventually drawn to 17th century England, focusing specifically upon the reign of Oliver Cromwell. The recorded histories of later periods had proven too detailed, the high levels of information proving to be a restricting factor. In contrast, writings pertaining to earlier timeframes lacked sufficient context, creating too many questions which disrupted the protagonist's backstory. So, it was into this setting that the fictional character of Philip Aylesford was duly inserted, along with many tragedies and torments experienced within his lifetime. An aristocrat of no particular fame or notoriety, Aylesford was raised a Catholic, and had been a supporter of the king during the English Civil War. Aylesford had retired to his estate in Middle England. Aylesford had married Dorothea, the beautiful daughter of a noble family. It soon became apparent, however, that the two were not a match, with both parties withdrawing from one another, trapped within a barren and fruitless relationship. Philip had gone on to rediscover happiness with a common woman named Margot, bringing her back to the estate in the guise of a servant girl. The nobleman had enjoyed a short and passionate affair, but Dorothea soon grew suspicious of the new arrival, denouncing Margot for trying to bewitch her unwitting husband using dark magic. Thinking only of his wealth and reputation, the hapless landowner had gone along with his wife's accusation, even giving evidence against his lover at her trial. He had stood in silence as Margot was convicted of witchcraft, and then suffocated his emotions as she was led from the courtroom to be burned at the stake. Months later, his servants had found Philip's body lying twisted and broken on the ground below one of the battlements of his home, having hurled himself to his death in guilt and despair. With the detail of his sad tale now decided, the group went as far as to engage a local artist to draw a picture of their creation, before then setting about willing him into existence. The 8 members of the TSPR who had dedicated themselves to the experiment assembled on a weekly basis. During these meetings, they would discuss Philip's life in detail, questioning his actions and motives, exploring the grief that had led him to his tragic and untimely end. These discussions would then progress to invitations for the spirit of the dead nobleman to reveal itself, so that they could question him further on his life. Seated around the commissioned drawing of Philip, one member of the group would be nominated at each meeting to reach out with their mind. They would visualize the dead aristocrat and call him to attend, before going on to share what they had experienced with the rest of the group. An entire year would pass with no success, before Iris Owen proposed that they enact changes to the way in which they were attempting to make contact, working under normal room lighting as opposed to the candlelight they had previously been utilising. No one member was now allowed to act independently of the others. The group would instead silently reach out together in the hopes of contacting Philip's spirit, combining their efforts to manifest him. Almost immediately, this change in technique garnered results, with members of the group detecting a faint tapping upon the tabletop and walls. After several further meetings, the team devised a method for the spirit to communicate with them, recording a series of positive and negative responses to their questions. The audible knocking of their spectral visitor was later accompanied by physical movements of the table they were seated at, seemingly moving of its own accord a short distance from its original position and then back again, despite the group having only rested their fingertips upon it. As time passed, the table's movement in response to their questions became more pronounced, sometimes tilting to one side or rocking back and forth on one of its legs. There was an unexpected further development as the lights in the room began to dim or flicker, individually at first and then together in unison. Philip's confidence and apparent abilities seemed to grow, to the point where he briefly appeared to those who had summoned him as a light mist. Eventually, after being observed by several independent witnesses and filmed as part of a studio television program, Philip's responses gradually became less frequent, until they finally ceased altogether. The spirit seemed to have tired of the brief existence which it had been called to, fully acknowledging that this activity could only have been created via their own minds. Dr. Owen recorded several intriguing observations. If any member of the group was absent for a meeting or physically unwell, it was noted that Philip's spirit either did not appear or did so in an apparently weakened state. Several group members also reported poltergeist-like activity in their own homes after they had returned from their weekly meeting. This suggested that their creation had either accompanied them to their residence, or their activities had somehow attracted the attention of an unrelated, genuine spirit entity. Keen to replicate their apparent success, the TSPR went on to form a second group, comprised of members who had not been part of the original experiment. As before, they would spend several weeks crafting an entirely fictional character, settling on Lilith, a French-Canadian girl who had opposed the Germans during World War II. Once again, after a sustained period, their attempts to will the soul of the wartime resistance fighter into existence met with apparent success. A degree of dialogue was established via a series of knocking sounds and table movements, though not as intensely as with the first group. Similar results would be obtained in further seances involving fictional characters, carried out not only by the TSPR, but other groups based as far afield as Australia. Many years on from the events of the Philip experiment, the fictional ghost's legacy remains something of a double-edged sword. On one hand, the research generated surprisingly little criticism or pushback from the scientific community towards the published results. However, there has never been any real agreement as to how what was witnessed came to be achieved. Despite none of the participants claiming to possess psychic powers, some commentators cite the experiments as proof that such latent abilities must truly exist. Others take a more grounded view, agreeing that it was nothing more than a shared hallucination created by those who participated, with each of those present subconsciously influencing the physical side effects. A smaller number of observers postulated that a real entity may well have been summoned from the astral plane, which then took on the identity of Philip as part of a deceitful act, impersonating their creation for its own demonic ends. As with numerous other assertions and trials of this nature, the perception of the event may be influenced as much by the observers as by the participants. Depending on the extent to which an onlooker believes in such things, they might choose to overlook someone else manipulating objects, or even agree that an apparition is manifesting, even if it does not truly exist. Conversely, some individuals may completely reject any inexplicable phenomenon, attributing it solely to deception and manipulation on the part of those involved. Much like the individuals gathered around the table during the Philip experiment, it could be that people often see only what they want to see, and as to how real it is, well, that is entirely within the eye and the mindset of the beholder.
Awesome. We will link this video in the description and the creator. They actually make really awesome videos at
They
bedtime
do.
stories. Go check them out. Give them a like. Support the original creators. They appreciate it, and so do we.
So
Okay.
interesting concept of like trying to make a ghost, you know?
Well, yeah. And thought forms are a real thing. You do create your own reality. And energy, even in the form of imagination, goes somewhere.
So it's possible maybe that they like at least kind of semi-created something, or
In these instances, and again, like thought forms, without actually reading the actual experiment or having been there myself, it's difficult to tell what exactly took place. The thought forms really only have the amount of energy that you're giving to them, but these people are spending years giving energy to creations, right? So
like they're putting a lot of effort into trying to manifest a particular
exactly.
thing.
They're aligned in their desire to have something happen in order to prove their experiment, right? Manifestation works in that way when your energy and your alignment and everything, your desire to make something happen, or you have a group of people, especially like-minded people who are all working towards the same ends, then things transpire. So
Makes sense.
is it possible that it's a thought form that they poured enough belief and energy into to have something manifest and physically happen? Yeah, absolutely. That's a thing that can happen. I think that the underlying thing is to write that off, or to make it evidence that there's nothing else happening.
Because
Right?
there could be many other things happening.
Science has this way of wanting some absolute answer, right? Like, oh, if thought forms are a thing, if we can generate them, then all such activity is a thought form and nothing is actually real. But the problem is really with their definition of real. Like, if you made something real, then it's real. Like, do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, science has to base itself off of observable and repeatable evidence, which is very difficult when you're dealing with concepts that don't exist in a fashion that is measurable in that sense by instruments or whatnot, you know.
Right. Yeah. They want just linear, concrete evidence that, you know,
I think if
things are real or not real. And it's, when it comes to stuff like this, it's, you know, it's real if it's real to you. Like, these people poured a ton of energy into this, and then activity manifested. Now, the first thing that I said is still equally legitimate. Like, when you're attempting to do something like that, it's possible anything was coming through trying to make contact, or it could have been anybody connected to anybody in the room that came through and was like, hey, I'm here, you know?
Yeah, kind of like, you know, moths are attracted to light, so you put on a light, expect some moths to show up.
Yeah, exactly. So that easily could have been the case as well. And for me, you know, without being there to physically you know, sense what's going on, it's hard to tell the difference between the two, right?
Yeah.
Of something that people willed into existence, they manifested the results that they were hoping for, or if, again, having the light on attracted something else to come
check it out.
Again, like, I'm not sure why people are always so quick to put demonic connotations on things.
It's just the natural way of going about it. Supernatural thing must be demons.
Yeah, just showing up and like tapping the table is not really a demonic activity. Like, that's
it's evil tapping. The lights have flickered.
Yeah, people tend to put all kinds of connotations on things like that, and there's really not actually anything evil happening.
He slightly scooted the table, messing up the feng shui of the room.
Yeah, people tend to be afraid of things they don't understand, and, you know, the concept of demons or evil entities is an old one. It's, you know, it's handed down over generations of humanity, and, you know, again, based on my own experiences, I can completely understand that, you know, some of what you interact with on this kind of a level does not come off as very nice.
Yeah.
Right. But some of who I interact with at Walmart don't come off as very nice either. So,
you know, you don't need demons to have evil in the world.
You don't need demons to have some not very nice and very unpleasant interactions. Just because something is not physical anymore or has transitioned already and acts like a jerk doesn't make them evil. It just
makes them a jerk.
It just makes them a jerk. Exactly. So important to keep in mind. And there's lots of reasons why quote unquote ghosts, might manifest in certain locations. Again, it's energy connections, things that they're connected to from life is an easy port of entry for them to come through. And spirits on the other side, souls, once they've transitioned, they do like to come in and check up on physical reality. They do like to check on the places that they were and feel connected to.
I know if I was a ghost, I'd still probably come back just to check out the new movies.
They do like to come back and check on the energy and of the places that they loved and the people that they loved. And I think people get this have this impression that like it's a one-way ticket, or it's
it's a more revolving door.
You don't walk into heaven and then they slam the pearly gates and you're trapped there. It's not an internment camp. You know what I mean? It's just, I'm not sure what that thought process or philosophy is that the only kinds of activities that we experience must be pure spirits that are trapped in their location because of their painful demise.
I think the general assumption from the religious perspective is that if heaven's so great, why would you ever leave it? And if you're in the other place, you can't leave it.
Yeah, none of it is a locked door or a closed door, right?
Yeah.
And those beliefs can be sorry, friends. Those beliefs can be a part of why people get out of alignment and get stuck and can't cross over. Seriously.
Well, yeah, I can imagine if you hold a certain belief strongly enough and you get over there and things aren't going quite as you expect, it can create some cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's when people are afraid of their God concept, or they're afraid of what might happen, they shy away from the light. They shy away. They're afraid to cross over fully. You know what I mean? If when you get there, you're going to be judged and cast into the burning pit of fire, that people are hesitant to do that. They're afraid to make contact with that energy and to cross over. And the rules, I don't know if you've noticed, are a little strict. So depending on how fundamentalist you are with some of these beliefs, like basic human needs and activities can sometimes be enough to
condemn.
Correct. So, people, sometimes the reason that souls are having difficulty connecting to the light and crossing over is the fear of what might happen when they do, because a lot of the stories that people were raised with are scary and judgmental and potentially horrible, right? Like, so that kind of crossing over with that kind of fear energy is not helpful for people, right? Heaven, I should say, isn't they don't slam the pearly gates and lock you in. Like, absolutely, the departed loved ones can come check on your energy, check on the situation, check on places that they liked and cared about previously. There's energy pathways to all of those types of things to come through. So what they witnessed, what came through, could have been anything. It could have been, depending on where they were holding the meetings, it could have been somebody who was connected to the location. It could have been somebody connected to one of the people that was there, checking in on them. There's nothing escalatory or bad, happening in this situation.
The most intense it got was mist.
Yeah. So, I don't see any reason to believe that there's some sort of hostile, evil, demonic, anything going on in these situations. And it is possible, because thought forms are a real thing and fragment personalities are a real thing, that they created the energy surrounding a personality to the degree where it started to manifest and come through for them. That's a thing that can happen too.
The bottom line is that any number of things could have happened there.
Yeah, it's not really evidence one way or another of what happened.
Just that something happened.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And people have to go by what they experience themselves. There's really not any way to prove things to other people. Like, you have an open mind and you're willing to experience things. And on occasion you've been sitting here when things happened. Yeah. Right. Not necessarily evil, wasn't our magical thought forms coming to life. Like, there was no specific, you weren't intending to create something that would move something, right? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily like evidence that nothing exists because we're creating it in our own minds.
Yeah.
We can create experiences when we put our energy into it, but that also doesn't mean that the experiences aren't real just because we created them.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, I don't know. That's what I got on that one. Drop us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you think we're crazy or if you think we're on to something. Like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. And we will see you guys next time on Unraveling the Unexplained.
Have a good one, folks.